So, yeah, at first, please tell us something about your musical education.
Right. Well, my musical education is very interesting because I do not have a formal musical education. I actually have a degree in mathematics. And following that, I did a postgraduate diploma in music information technology. And then I got a scholarship to study sound for film at the National Film and Television School in England, which is a very one of the world's best film schools. But as a child, I learned the violin and the piano. So I took music lessons privately and had those. And then I was self-taught on various other instruments like the guitars, and I would pluck and bang and scrape anything I could. and I was always writing tunes from a very young age on the piano and on any instrument, and I wanted to be a singer as well. So at school, I was in various school orchestras with the violin, and I had my own bands at school, and I sang in choirs. I went to a Church of England school during the week, so I was singing in Latin choirs and various all sorts of different choirs. And I actually wanted to be a singer at the age of 10. There was one problem, which is I suffer from stage fright. So I I decided I couldn't be a performer, and I got enraptured by what goes on behind the scenes, and I fell in love with sound. And the technical side of engineering, and so that was my path into music. But I music has always been ingrained in me from a very young age, and I also studied Indian classical instruments like the sitar and the tablas. So I have a very eclectic musical world that I grew up with.
Wow. And yeah, what was your very first film score?
That I listened to or that I composed?
Both, if you want.
Okay. I grew up with I loved film music
Mhm.
from a young age, and I also got exposed to the power of film and storytelling from television. So I grew up listening to television theme tunes. I used to be in the kitchen or in my bedroom somewhere, and my favorite television show would come on TV, and I heard the theme tune, and I would rush into the living room. I said, "This is my show. I love this tune."
Mhm.
And so I was exposed to through music through television from a young age of sort of 6 or 7, and of
Wow.
course children's television series, sort of animations and Tom and Jerry, and sort of the power of storytelling through music in film and television really grabbed my attention. And when I was very young, my parents bought a very expensive turntable, and we used to go to this big department store called Harrods,
Mhm.
and in the summer sales, and they used to sell old records of vinyl LPs for 50 pence, €1.
Wow.
And my mother used to buy me all these James Bond film scores and music from films from the 1960s and the 70s and the 80s. So I got exposed to film music from a very young age. One of my early heroes was John Barry. Music from the Tamarind Seed and all those old Bond scores,
Mhm.
and then of course Ennio Morricone, the maestro of melody and this unique sound world. So that sort of captivated me and transported me to a world of just different musical worlds, but also different film worlds, because I loved film was a great form of escapism for me.
Mhm.
And it opened up, I mean, film has the ability to transport you to other worlds and immerse you, away from your everyday life. So the power of music and film really grabbed me from a young age. And I didn't know that that's what I wanted to do when I was growing up, that I wanted to be a film composer my whole life. I was always, and I still do, I sing all the time and I irritate everyone around me. So I'll be watching film or TV and I'll be humming and singing quietly, of course, but but I'm always singing counter melodies and I can hear what the score is doing, and so I irritate my partner all the time by by singing all the time. But of course now I control it and I do it when I'm writing music and channel that creative energy in that way. So in terms of, to answer your question about my first score that I wrote, I actually started in the industry as a sound designer on feature films, and I because I loved sound and I love the power of what to do, not just music for film, but also sound effects. How you can use sound effects in a narrative storytelling way for telling a story. So I worked on quite big feature films as a sound designer, doing sound effects, foley's, dialogue editing, all aspects of sound post production. And I worked with Werner Herzog and Bernardo Bertolucci on some films, Little Buddha and Werner Herzog's documentary feature about the lessons of darkness. And from there, I then progressed to a little bit of music editing as well. And then I sort of stepped back from sound editing and wanted to work in music. And because I was developing my own recording studio at home, I was buying equipment and synthesizers and recording equipment. I met Peter Gabriel, who has a wonderful recording studio called Real World Studios, where he works with world musicians. It's a great record label as well. That's been operating since the mid 80s, I think. And early 90s, I think, actually. And I wrote him a letter uh, and said I would love to visit your studios because I was very interested in world music. I grew up with world music and music from other cultures. And he said, "Come along and visit me," and I did. And basically, he offered me a job. I worked for him as his assistant music engineer. So that opened up a whole different world for me in terms of working with the world's greatest producers and engineers and great musicians and working on other people's music. And I did this for a while, and I then decided that I didn't want to work on other people's music. I wanted to work on my own music. So I met a music supervisor who gave me a break and said, "Nainita, I know you want to write music for TV and media, and would you like to write the music for a travel series for Channel 4, one of the big channels in the UK?" And I jumped at the opportunity, and I didn't know, no one had ever paid me to write music, and I didn't know how to write music for TV and how to synchronize with time code and work to picture. And I was up all day and night trying to teach myself how to do it on the job. And I completed the program. It was music for a program about traveling to Chile and Peru in South America. And the film company liked what the music that I wrote and said, "Would you like to do another one?" And another program and another program. And then that was it. And I was very lucky, and my sort of network expanded. And 20 years later, I'm still writing music for film and TV.
Wow. Yeah, film music to listen is always a little bit, yeah. Because, yeah, a lot of my friends didn't understand what I like on film music because they watched the movie and watched the film and it's like, okay, great movie and great actors and okay, what's with music? What? Music? And so, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so my first approach was The Lion King in the cinema. Um,
really?
I
Okay.
watched it 8 times, and
Hmm.
so I get a sing along, and yeah, because I love the movie and the music, and yeah, I wanted to see it, yeah, again and again, again and again.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, my father used to take me to the cinema when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to go to the cinema and watch a film. As I never knew what I was going to be watching. He sort of big grown-up adult films. And then when the film finished in the cinema, in those days, no one checked your tickets. So he said, let's watch it again. So we used to stay in our seats and watch the film all over again.
Wow.
So I used to, so every time I went to the cinema with my father, we'd watch a film twice. And I think that's so the first time I enjoyed the film, and then the second time, that's when I used to start taking notice of the music and other things in the film. So that helped me develop my love of film and that whole world really.
Mm-hmm. My passion for film music started when I watched the first Lord of the Rings. Um, in one scene, I
Ah,
closed my eyes and enjoyed the music, and then, oh, moment, I'm in the cinema. Open your eyes.
yes,
And
yes.
so I watched it 3 times, and then at the third time, I see the scene. So,
Yeah. I mean, I love all film. There's so many films that are so important to me, and when I went to film school, I studied film as well. So I remember early David Lynch films
mhm,
like Eraserhead and Blue Velvet were the images that stayed in my mind are remarkable from David Lynch's work. Martin Scorsese, with Goodfellas and Raging Bull. Just I think the imagery and Bertolucci and the sheltering sky. I love the lighting. Also, I mean, I love Vittorio Storaro was Bernardo Bertolucci's lighting and cameraman and DOP, and he paints with light. And so, I'm very influenced. I'm very visually inspired. So if I go to an art exhibition and I see art, or if I watch a film and see images when I get sent a film, I'm very influenced by the images. So that because as soon as I see something, whether it's a photograph or a still image, the lighting, the tone, the composition of the framing of the image, it says so much to me that it brings, I hear music when I see those images. So, even things like Spielberg, and Jaws, the power of that sort of the two-note motif for
mhm,
Jaws, written by John Williams, or the motifs and the themes written for Close Encounters and E.T. are just I think melody is what attracts me more than anything. And over the years, the trends in film scoring have changed.
mhm,
So it's not very cool or trendy these days in a lot of television and film scoring to use melody
mhm,
and tunes. And yet, what is it that we love about film music? When you ask ordinary people, what is your favorite film score? Or me when I was growing up, I loved melody. I loved Morricone. I loved John Barry. I loved so many film composers. Bernard Herrmann, whose music I adore, but it's the films. It's for me when people listen to film music, I tend not to listen to music on its own so much. I watch the film to appreciate the music. You can't separate the film and the music for me. It's all 50% of the experience is through watching the film when you
mhm,
want to listen to the music. So, films like Taxi Driver, when I saw Taxi Driver for the first time, I was just, it blew my mind, with the opening scene with the neon lights and Robert De Niro in the taxi cab driving through the streets of New York at night with the water and the reflections of the rain glistening on the traffic lights on the front of the front window of the taxi cab, with Bernard Herrmann's amazing jazz influenced score, is just one of the seminal moments in cinema for me. So that power of visuals and music is incredibly potent and magical.
Mhm. Yeah, for me, it's kind of a mix. A few times the music make me curious about the movie. So, for example,
Mm-hmm.
Papillon for Jerry Goldsmith. I listen to
Mm-hmm.
the music, and, beautiful melody, but how does
Mm.
that fit in that film? So I watched the
Yes.
movie and whoa, it's so so spared. The most of the movie is without music, and then when the
Mm.
music
Mm.
comes, it's so intense and
Mm.
yeah. And
Yes.
another Black Panther, for example, I listened to music
Yeah.
and I thought, well, okay, that's music from a comic movie. How did that fit? And so it's
Yes. 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 It's being able to create a unique sound world for each project.
mhm,
That's what I enjoy. So when people say, "What style of music do you write?" It's a very difficult question for me to answer because I write the score that fits the film. That's so important. Many composers are known for having a unique voice, and I like to think that I have several different voices. And occasionally someone may come up to me and say, "Oh, Nainita, I heard your music and I thought I knew it was you." I thought, "Really? How did you know it was my score?" I don't think that I have a unique voice that comes through, not in the way that the film composer greats do, like Williams or Morricone or Thomas Newman.
mhm,
He's got a remarkable voice. That's He sits on the edge of ambivalence. There's a neutrality to his music emotionally, where he sits on the fence emotionally with his music, and I love that about his music. But with my music, I like to think that I write what fits the film. Every film is different. And this year, I've been very lucky and privileged to have worked on some very, very different projects where the musical styles have stretched me in different directions, which has been really fascinating.
And yeah, you mentioned your work with the legendary directors like Werner Herzog and Bernardo Bertolucci. And
Mhm.
how was it to work with them?
Well, I was very young.
Mhm,
So I was assisting the editor and I was working on the music editing and also the sound effects. So it sort of blew my mind because the power of Herzog's imagery. The film that I worked on was about the burning oil fields of Kuwait. So there was a real insight into how he thinks and constructs films together. And I've worked with his exec producer a few times since then over the last 20 years. So it's been very insightful. I mean, I'm a big fan and follower of Herzog. He's very, he's so unique in the way he utilizes music in his films and totally goes against the grain. And I think he's always been very much ahead of the curve in terms of leading trends. He does his own thing and he's very strong-minded and a real individual. And and that's why he's had this remarkable career for being true to himself. And it's taught me a lot about you have to be true to yourself and follow your own voice, and develop your own voice. So that was a really interesting experience. Working on Bertolucci's film Little Buddha, I was assisting on advising on the use of Buddhist chants within the film,
mhm,
and I worked on it for about 6 months actually, working with the sound editing team. So I remember there was one day when we were mixing the film. They were mixing the film in Paris, and I was in London, part of the London team, still working on the film here. And I had a phone call from Paris saying there was one scene in the film, and he said, "I want to hear the sound of a cuckoo
mhm,
singing, a bird," and I had to I went through 60 different cuckoo sounds until he found the perfect sound of the bird that was tweeting in the background. So sound was incredibly, it taught me a lot about the power of using sound in as a storytelling device, and creating a whole world of the soundscape feels very natural. You think that you record everything on location, but actually it's not true. Everything is very artificial in film. Every sound is reconstructed and redone. All the footsteps, or the opening the doors, or the sounds of the birds, the trees, the trains, the planes. Everything is reconstructed afterwards in post-production. So that was a great learning ground for me. Working with Peter Gabriel taught me a lot about the psychology of working with musicians, and how to what's important is, when I'm working with musicians, it's about capturing the magic of performance. That when you have a great musician playing for you, when I bring musicians to my studio, like a violinist or a cellist or a flautist, I pick the musicians very carefully for the project. I know so many violinists and so many cellists, but I'm very careful about who I choose, because each musician comes with their personality to a session. And I want to capture the personality and the magic of performance of a particular musician that's right for my score. So, for example, with Untamed Romania, I specifically wanted Richard Harwood to play the cello solos on the score, because he has a certain way and a certain form of expression which I thought would be beautiful for this score.
And yeah, about Untamed Romania, it sounds very, very interesting, that film. And if I have understood that correctly, it's about the natural beauty of Romania and the protection and respect for the animals, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, it's basically it's a cinematic journey into Romania's astounding natural beauty and diversity of its wildlife. So the film covers a huge range of wildlife in what's now regarded as the last bastion of European wilderness, which is Romania, where you have true, real wilderness. And the film showcases the breadth of topography, and that you've got a wide range of biodiversity, a wide range of natural history in that whole region. Plus, you have the beauty of the Carpathian Mountains, the forests of Transylvania, the Danube, the marshes, and the plains, salt marsh plains. So there's a huge amount of wildlife to cover. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw the little feature, and yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful pictures. I love nature documentaries, but I don't watch them very often, because then it's about the humans and how they destroy everything. It's like, oh, okay, I hate humans. I hate documentaries. And so
I know what you mean. Yes, yeah.
But that sounds great. Try to watch it. And yeah, the music is just beautiful. And
thank you.
And congratulations that the score has won in the category Best Film Score 2019.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you want me to talk a little bit about the music? Yeah. Okay.
So for example, was it planned from the beginning that this would be a classical orchestral score?
Yes. Well, when I met with the film team, the first thing they said to me was they want this to be played by a live orchestra. Okay, what's your budget? And I said, they told me, and I thought, okay, I think I can work with this. I can do something with this. It was really important for me to record the whole orchestra together. Normally, when we're recording film scores, we'll do it in sections. We'll have the strings on their own or the brass on their own. And with this, I wanted to have the whole 75-piece symphony orchestra playing together in one room, one particular orchestra, which is the National Orchestra of Wales, because they have this, they're used to playing together. They're not just session musicians where they're working on different projects all the time individually. They work together as a living, breathing organism, and they play together, which creates a very different kind of feel. The recording has a liveliness to it where you can hear them breathing almost. So that was quite exciting. And I wanted to stay to a live symphonic feel as much as possible, and use melodies, which is something that, as I said before, it's using melodies is regarded as being rather, it's not the coolest thing to do these days. And so I saved up all the melodies that I've written in the last 10 years that I've never used, wasn't allowed to use. I saved them all up and used them on this film because the animals have characters. The storytelling is so important. There was a lot of responsibility because it's a nature film, because it's a wildlife film. The music is allowed to breathe and tell the stories. So there are lots of different themes. There are universal themes of hunting, conflict, power between the animals, parenthood. You've got cubs and infants learning and playing. So the animals had very strong characters, and I wanted to bring that out musically. And of course, the visuals were really stunning. So that was a good sort of opportunity to do that. And also, I wanted to take the viewer on an emotional journey through the film. So just as you're taken basically, the film is a year in the life of Romania, and you're taken through 4 seasons. And also, one of the central characters are a family of bears. So you're taken through on this emotional journey as the bears grow up from being cubs to sort of young adults to fully grown adults. And so the bears have their own theme as well that you hear in different forms. So I developed this lyrical thematic score using melodies to pull the film together. And then, of course, you've got Transylvania. And in my mind, Transylvania is this mystical, magical world of vampires and forests and wolves. So that's something that we wanted to bring out as well. The film team said that we want the score to have some elements of this magical fairy tale feel with magical forests. And you can hear that in one of the cues, Legends of the Fire Salamander, which has this feel that takes you harks back to ancient legends. So that was quite interesting. The 4 seasons have their own theme as well. So when you're taken through spring, summer, autumn and winter, each season has its own emotion. So spring is very light and playful, summer is very hot and relaxed and languid, autumn is quite melancholic and sad and beautiful, and winter is very cold and inhospitable. So the only way I felt that I could achieve that was through using melodies. So that was quite an interesting journey to go on. And so the bears have their own themes, from the playful. So there are a few pieces of music like Bear Mischief or Curious Bear Cubs, where it's the same melody, but it's portrayed in a very light and playful way, and mischievous way. And then you have ranging through to some big battle scenes, which are quite amazing. The wolves and the bears, where the wolves are turning on this bear and chasing a bear, and this female bear is fighting for her life. So that was great to explore. And because I knew I had a whole 75-piece orchestra at my fingertips, I wanted to make full use of the whole orchestra, not just the strings and the brass even, but I've always find the woodwinds are always neglected, and I really wanted to make full use of the woodwind section, actually, because there's so many interesting textures and colors that the woodwinds can bring to a score. And I know I was quite sort of influenced by Alexandre Desplat. Originally, he was a flautist and a woodwind player. So I really wanted to sort of bring out that aspect in the score. And there are some little moments which are like I pay tribute, like a homage to some lovely styles of writing that I've always wanted to write in. So, for example, there's one cue, the mountains have their own theme, and there's a big sweeping melody. And there's one piece called the Apuseni Mountains. And for about 4 seconds, or maybe 5 seconds, there's one bit which is with a big harp run, and it is very lush and sweeping. And it's like a tribute to John Barry Bond's score in that moment. So I'd be interested to see if anyone spots that moment.
Search it.
But I mean, it's not all orchestral. There are a few cues which are electronic as well. There's one on the soundtrack release that's synth based, which is the Mayfly season, and that was like a tribute to 80s synthwave and analog synths. It has a feel that's like Blade Runner-esque quality to it, and that was another sort of seminal influential score for me, Vangelis's Blade Runner. And it just felt right for the mayfly. When you watch that scene with thousands of mayflies coming to life in the season, it just had this futuristic science fiction like quality to it. And so the team said, let's do something in that feel. But it's still symphonic in sound, even though I'm using synths, it has this epic symphonic quality to it, so it still fit in with the orchestral score. There are other moments in the film where we go under the ground, and so I was trying to create two separate worlds, so above the ground and below the ground, and where we'd go beneath into the soil and we see sort of caterpillars and insects. And so that had a different quality to it, which is very sort of electronic and drone-based music.
And and how long did you work on that score?
Well, I was brought on when they started to edit the film. So I was starting to write some initial ideas through the editing process, but I actually didn't start writing until I got the picture lock, the whole film. I had 6 weeks to write the whole score, which was about 88 minutes of music in 6 weeks. I then spent a week recording. So I had my main sessions were with the BBC National Orchestra of Wales in Cardiff, and then we had some more smaller intimate cues to record. So I then came back to London and recorded at Angel Studios. I recorded 16-piece string section for some chords. So for example, there's one cue, there's one piece which I'm really very proud of, the Golden Eagles, and it's called Golden Eagle Hunting Ground, and it's with this incredibly beautiful and elegant golden eagle, which has found its prey. It's found a hare on the ground from a very, very far, long distance away. And so the whole sequence is about this golden eagle chasing this hare and eventually killing this hare for its meal. And I wanted the cue to be reminiscent of a slightly 1990s Hollywood score, sort of action score, because there's a lot of movement. There's not very much movement in the sky. When you see this eagle flying, you don't really realize the power of what it can do. And so the music had to sort of take you on this exciting journey. So we had 125 strings playing this. So I recorded the long strings, which are about 55-piece string section. Then we recorded the rhythmical strings, the short strings, which were another 55 strings playing on top of the first pass, the first long strings. And then in London, I had 16-piece string section recording another, when the eagle is swooping down from the sky and sort of dropping down rapidly to catch the hare. I got the strings to play these very sort of airy, floaty arpeggiated riffs to represent the soaring eagle flying down, swooping, coming down from the sky and catching the hair. So it was very powerful, and the only way I could get the power through was to have such a huge section playing, and then we had brass and we had sort of electronic beats underneath. So it's like my tribute, an homage to sort of 90s Harry Gregson Williams-esque kind of action score. So that was a lovely moment. And there's one cue where I actually sing, and it's this beautiful moment where it's called The Chrysalis Awakens, and this lovely moment where a chrysalis pupae becomes a butterfly, and out of the chrysalis grows this beautiful butterfly. And so that was written in a very organic way, where I just sat at the keyboard and sang and played the piano. And I then afterwards brought in Richard Harwood to play the cello on top of that, and we recorded some strings. So sometimes when I'm writing, it just flows and it's quite magical. Sometimes I have to work very hard. There are a couple of cues which were quite challenging to write because nothing was happening on the screen, and I had to dig deep into my soul to find the right how can I make this cue work. It's quite challenging, but we got there in the end.
Wow. And yeah, and then I know the name, and especially the name of the orchestra conductor Alastair King from his work with Murray
Yes.
Gold on Doctor Who.
Yes.
And how was the work with him?
Yes, I mean, he orchestrated. So in terms of my process, I wrote the score in 5.5, 6 weeks. I got the whole film, and what I had to do is to create mock-ups. They're called mock-ups or demos for the team, for the film team to listen to, for the director and the producers to approve. So I wrote, as I was writing each cue, I would then send it to the team to approve. I was very lucky in that I got a lot of creative freedom. So I actually managed to, normally score writing is a very collaborative process when you're working with film teams. And I don't get my way all the time. I have a vision, and the director has their vision of the score for their film, and so I tend to. It is a true, it's teamwork. But on this film, every cue I was writing, the team were loving it, so I had total freedom to do what I wanted within the brief, which was to write a contemporary orchestral score. So I'd write each cue, I would demo it up. Once the team approved it, I would then pass the files to Alastair, my orchestrator, and he would then. I'm the type of composer that is very detailed in. I will write every single note on my computer system before it goes to my orchestrator. So with Alastair, he was very understanding, and he's a very easy, collaborative orchestrator and conductor to work with. So we'd work very closely together. We'd go back and forth, and then when it came to the actual recording session, I wanted Alastair to conduct this because he has a lot of experience working with the BBC National Orchestra, and he did a lot of the Doctor Who scores in Cardiff. So that's where we chose to record. So that's why he's got a good relationship with the orchestra, and that's why I wanted him to handle the conducting for me. And I prefer to sit in the control room because I use a different set of ears. So I listen to the music and I can make better creative judgments, and then he's in front of the orchestra conducting. So we have a good sort of communication between the two of us in the session. And then I spent 1 week mixing the music in my own studio, and on feature films and bigger projects, I will bring in my own mix engineer into my studio to mix for me, well, mix with me. So I tend to do all my mixing myself, and on this score, I'll tend to mix up to 80% of where I want to go with the score, and then I'll bring in my mix engineer to just to finish it off and give it that cinematic feel in 5.1 surround.
I love that orchestra. Yeah, because of Doctor Who, it sounds so beautiful and so powerful, and yeah.
They're a great orchestra to work. In fact, I've worked with them again. I wrote the music, the theme tune for the royal wedding between Meghan and Prince Harry for the BBC. So they were wonderful to work with, and we wanted, because it was a BBC production, we wanted a BBC orchestra, and so they were my first choice to record them. So I was very lucky to work with them again.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, do you would you say you have a favorite orchestra?
Oh gosh, I'm going to be diplomatic and say no. We have great musicians in the UK, and I have worked with the London Contemporary Orchestra, who've played on a video game score for me last year, and that was a very different experience and a different way of working. I really love working with the LCO because they're very collaborative. You can actually improvise with them in the recording session, which is a unique way of working. And I worked with Hugh, who co-runs the orchestra with Rob Ames. Hugh Brunt is great, and they bring in sort of these London musicians. They're used to working together. So I scored a live action narrative video game earlier this year, which came out recently, called Telling Lies. And it's a very modern neoclassical score. I was quite constrained with the musicians on that one. It wasn't a symphonic score. It was a sort of modern neoclassical sort of spy hacking, covert, intelligent kind of game. So that's a political thriller. And so for that, I just wanted pure live instruments. I didn't want any electronics. On Untamed Romania, I have the whole orchestra, but I do have other synth and electronic elements. But on this video game score, Telling Lies, I wanted it to be, because it's all about intimate relationships between these different characters, I wanted it to be very pure and raw and visceral and edgy. So that's why I choose my musicians very carefully. I worked with the LCO because they have their own sound, and the sound that I wanted was a very gritty, edgy, dirty, harsh sound from the musicians. So it's and even with that, there's one piece called Telling Lies Midnight, which is a slight tribute to Bernard Herrmann and Psycho and that kind of score writing, where it's because you've got complicated characters and very with multifaceted personalities. The music has a lot of depth to it in terms of its writing, where you're really sort of getting into the personalities of the people in the game. So they're a wonderful orchestra to work with. They've played on scores like Phantom Thread, and they do live scores like Moonlight and Under the Skin, and sort of they work in the more experimental area. I mean, I used a lot of experimental modern sort of classical techniques like spectral scrubbing and other such sort of techniques in their playing, which was really interesting to bring out. And when we were recording in the studio, I had the music that in front of them and that we wanted to record. But when we'd finished that, we were then experimenting with other techniques, so sort of semi-improvising in the recording session, which produced sort of, so when I'm writing, we know exactly what we're going to record, So there is nothing left to chance. You have to do that when you're recording a film score, like with Untamed Romania. I knew the film director and the producers, they all have to know exactly what they're going to get. But then afterwards, with this project, when we got into the studio, we recorded it, and they had the sheet music. And then once I built time into the recording session to do a bit of experimentation, so that we were turning up with trying different things, and sometimes we'd sort of improvise and create a sort of a fresh, because it was slightly, we were delving into the unknown. We didn't know what we were going to get. And that can be slightly, you can be quite concerned because it's quite risky doing things like that, where you're making notes up and you're improvising notes or even techniques. And that is a good place to be, because sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So when you're delving into the unknown and you're trying unknown techniques, it can produce some really exciting results. So I really, really enjoyed that sort of modern orchestral approach to writing.
And you worked with many orchestras many times. And I can imagine that it's every time a special feeling to listen to your own music. Is that something you are most looking forward to when it says orchestral recordings are planned?
Oh yes, I mean I think for a composer, it's the best. It's the best moment when you've been working for months or weeks on a score. I mean, the score for Romania was a fairly fast composed score, but I mean, we were working round the clock. I was working day and night and totally immersed in it. And you're working so hard in your studio, and sometimes it's hard to come up with that creative inspiration. But the best moment is when you go to the studio and there's a big buzz and a big excitement, and when you hear, I mean, I'll never forget, every time I hear my music performed by live musicians, it brings tears to my eyes. It's the best feeling in the world, where it's just brought to life. It's the best moment. It's why you work so hard for. And I always try and employ musicians whenever I can. I think it's so important to, I mean, I work on a lot of television projects. For example, I worked on a very, very successful documentary feature, which is in UK cinemas at the moment, called For Sama. That was a very electronic based score, but the film is about a Syrian woman who documented everything about her, the Syrian uprising over a 5-year period. And so the score for that, which was released last month, that was very electronic based, which I did in my own studio. But I think it's very important to bring in at least a couple of musicians whenever possible, because that injecting a human element into your music is just, it breathes life into it. So I brought a Syrian violinist onto the project who really brought the score to life. I had one violinist, one cellist, one double bass, and a Syrian violinist who played in a Syrian style, the violin. So that was, and it represented the soul of Aleppo, that sort of had that raw beauty to it, and soulfulness, blended in with the electronic elements. So yeah, so I tend to work on many different types of levels of score, not just live big symphonic stuff, material, but also more intimate scores and more electronic. A lot of the time my scores have an electronic element. I mean, I think Untamed Romania was my first big symphonic score played by an orchestra, actually, and since then I've done several more projects with orchestras. So yeah, it was quite a journey.
And I've read that you also like to use instruments from all over the world. What was the strangest instrument you have used in your music?
Oh, the strangest instrument. Okay, that is not too difficult. I worked with the human voice. I scored a series about the Arctic
Mhm.
and looking at uh, sort of the whole region around the Arctic for the BBC. And I wanted to be authentic with the instruments that I used. So I had to write music from Nunavut in the Northern Arctic Circle, Northern Canada. And I love doing a lot of research into other musical cultures and different instruments. And I always use unusual instruments and take them out of context and warp them and twist them and bring them into my music. So with this Northern Canadian sound, I thought, well, there are no musical instruments from that part of the world because and also I looked at northern Norway because I looked at the Sami people. So there's the Inuit people in northern Canada and the Sami people north of near Tromsø in northern Norway. And I wanted to bring in these singers, sort of Inuit throat singing and Sami yoiking from northern Norway. And I searched all over the UK and I couldn't find anyone who did that. And I love the research period is my favorite period when I'm working on a project where I'm sort of investigating and learning about different instruments and sounds and cultures. And I found an Inuit throat singer in Nunavut. And it took a week to get a message to her because she spends half her week in Montreal and half her week in northern Nunavut, where it's icy and cold. And so I hired a recording studio in Montreal, and she did this throat singing for me. So I wrote some music and sent it to her. And I was hoping that she would do her throat singing, which is this very guttural, rhythmical sound that she produces from her throat. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll do it myself. I can try and do it myself. And I was coughing and spluttering. I just couldn't do it myself. It's quite an art.
Mhm.
And throat singing, with Inuit throat singing, is where the men used to go away fishing traditionally, and so they used to leave the women at in their tents to look after the family and do all the cooking and the washing and the cleaning traditionally. It's a very traditional way of life, and so they had no form of entertainment. There was no electricity, there was nothing. They had no musical instruments because for musical instruments you need to have trees.
Mhm.
People make musical instruments out of wood, and there are no trees to make instruments out of. So they had to entertain. There are no trees up in northern Nunavut. So you have two women that stand opposite each other and they hold on to their arms, each other's arms, and they look at each other into their eyes and they do this rhythmical. I won't try and do it for you now, but they do this guttural rhythmic singing, and it's like a game that they one woman sings a rhythm and then the other woman sings a rhythm, and they both go backwards and forwards like a question and answer, and they do it until someone makes a mistake. And then, if they make a mistake, they all fall about with laughter and stop. And then the one who's done the best version is the winner. It's like a rhythm game, singing game. And so that was a very interesting experience working with a throat singer. And with the Sami Yoika, I was working on this project and I couldn't find anyone in the UK to do this yoiking. And I found this man who he was brought up with wolves, living in the forest, brought up as a child. I mean, this is sort of fairy tale story about this man. And as a yoika, he sings the sounds of the environment and of the sounds of the animals and the wolves. So he'll have a yoik for the eagle, he'll have a yoik for the wolves, he'll have a yoik for the forest. And So I flew him down to England, to my studio, and when I picked him up from the airport here, he was so shocked. He'd never seen so many people in his life. He was living in northern Norway with no one around him, and he barely took me 2 weeks to get the email message to him to see if he would be happy to come and yoik and sing for me. And I picked him up from the airport, and he was quite shocked at civilization and and it was a fantastic experience because I learned so much about his culture, and he was fascinated by how we worked here, and I played him the music, and he doesn't read music. He doesn't read notation, and it's like that with a lot of world musicians that I work with. They don't read music, but they do everything by ear. So I would sing to him, and I would sing him what I wanted him to sing, and then he would improvise around that. But it was very challenging because he wasn't used to the music that I was writing. So in the end I said, just do your thing and I will base everything around what you do. And it was just a fascinating exchange of musical cultures. um, so that's what I love working with world musicians, because I learned so much from them, and hopefully I can give something to them about my experience of music. So it's so that and I in my studio I have a wall of a collection of instruments that I have collected from all over the world, and I will utilize them in my work whenever I can. On every project I always try and collect something and to create a unique sound world for each project.
Wow. Yeah, sounds sounds wonderful. Yeah, I also read that you also love to find very special sound creations for your music. So is the search for the such sounds, yeah, similar?
Yeah, so because of my background when I started off as a sound designer, I used to travel around a lot with a portable sound recorder and record the sounds of nature and record the sounds of the environment or wherever I travel to in the world. I will always take my recording device with me, or even on my iPhone. Now I have my iPhone, and I will record sounds. And even though the quality of the sounds is not very good, it's not very high fidelity, it's about the character of the sound that's so important. So I will often, at the moment, I'm working on a very unusual project. It's a natural history wildlife project, and it's very contemporary in its approach to music and sound design. And I'm scoring one of the films is about a female spider, and she gets the male spiders into her web, and it's quite a dramatic film where she actually grabs the male spiders, and they want to mate with her, and they will mate with her, and then she will eat them and kill them and eat them. And so there are lots of vibrations of the web. So I'm using these special microphones, electromagnetic microphones, to capture the sound of electromagnetic waves of the of electronic gadgets. And so I'm creating sort of sounds that represent the web and the spider's web in that way. I'm working on a feature film at the moment, which is about nonverbal autism, which is very unusual, and it's a very beautiful poetic film. It's called The Reason I Jump, and it will be out next year. In festivals and cinemas. It's about how autistic people perceive the world. And so we're using music and sound design in a very creative way. And I'm creating a lot of music design. So I'm using the human voice in an experimental way, and I'm recording using the sounds that have been recorded on location and turning them into music. So, for example, there's one scene in the film where we have a ceiling fan going round and round, and I take the rhythm of that sound and create a musical rhythm out of it, and then I build other elements on top. So I sort of really enjoy working on projects which sort of push me creatively in unusual directions, and where I can use sound in an interesting way as well.
And yet, around Halloween, your score for the horror movie Darkness Visible will be released. I could already hear the score and find it very well done, and it creates a very intense atmosphere. And what can you tell me about it?
Well, the film is set in India, and it's about a man, a second generation British Asian man living in England, who goes to Calcutta to explore his roots and his and when he's there, he finds himself immersed in the spiritual underworld of Calcutta, and it's a very different world to how you normally hear or see of India. So he gets wrapped up in all sorts of, it's quite a sort of dark supernatural film. And so the score, the director said to me, I want to hear the sound of the city, this dark underworld of Calcutta, and I don't want obvious Indian music. I want it to be a sound that you've never heard before. So I used two Indian instruments. One is called a sarangi, which is a very old, ancient Indian instrument, and I used a lot of electronic manipulation and treatments. And again, I used the human voice to represent this soul, that this woman that is drawing our main character in. So it's a score. I also bring in a sort of unusual early medieval instruments as well. I use the Baroque violin and the guitar viol. I have an instrument called the guitar viol, which is based on the viola da gamba, which is a fretted sort of 16th, 17th century instrument to evoke this unique world of the spirits. And that's going to be a really, really interesting sort of, I can't wait to share that with the world, because it's so different to everything I've done before. And it's about capturing a real atmosphere in the film. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm quite excited about that one.
Yeah, I love horror music, especially at Halloween, because I make a Halloween special every year, and so I think I'll play it here.
Yeah, well, it's not your average horror score. It's very different. It's more atmospheric. I hope that audiences will find that interesting.
I try to find every year a few new stuff, so not the usual Halloween or Freddy or something. So I love to play with soundish scores with more sounds than melody. So it's very, very scary then.
Yes, I think sort of it's a way of sort of, I was going to say manipulate the audience, but you're taking the viewer on when I watch a film, I want to be going deep inside the world of the film and a totally new, different sort of creation of sort of a sound world. And that, so it's very important for me to, with Darkness Visible, it's you're creating an atmosphere and you're taking the viewer on a journey with the visuals, but also with the sound as well. And so, combining in Darkness Visible, where the sound design and this, is mixed in with the sound of the music, is this sort of rapturous world. It's quite I think it's a very sort of successful way of telling stories. I'm really, really interested in that, exploring and experimenting with sounds.
Mm. And I also try to create a very scary atmosphere. So yeah, that's something like, well, yeah, Halloween is something for
Yeah, yeah.
relaxation in the middle. So
Mm.
yeah.
Well, we have a screening of the film on the 31st of October in
Mm.
London. The film will be out in a few cinemas in London here, and I'll be doing a Q&A on the 31st of October after the film ends on Halloween. So that's going to be quite exciting.
Yeah. So more general, what is inspiring you?
What is inspiring me? Oh gosh, Anne. I think as I've said before, I've working on projects that push me in different directions, and I don't like to repeat myself musically. So if I work on a project and then someone else comes along and says, "Can you do that score again? Can you write that music again?" It doesn't interest me so much unless I can push things in a slightly different direction. So, for example, working on Untamed Romania was just a joy to work on. And I know that if on my next film I do a big symphonic score, I'll be wanting to push into sort of experiment and try different approaches. So I mean, sound is sound for me, whether it's working with a big orchestra or whether it's working on, something like For Summer, for example, which is a very electronic based score with ethnic elements. I'd like to work out of the box all the time, and also storytelling is so important. So I like to work not just in film and television, but I'm working in video games has been incredibly liberating because there are lots of technical challenges to working in games, and the music is treated in a different way. So that's very interesting. I'm interested in reaching audiences in new ways. So I'm working on a series at the moment, which is a 15 films, but each film is 10 minutes long. And it's a series for a new streaming platform called Quibi. It's a bit like Netflix, but it's for mobile phones. And it's a wildlife series. So I've got 15 10-minute films, and it's for people to watch on their mobile phones. So it's very high quality, high end productions, but it's for dramas and documentaries for mobile phones. So that excites me and that inspires me working on new types of projects. I'm very interested in working in sort of non-linear interactive forms of entertainment like interactive opera and ballet. I would love to write for dance and VR. So having scored my first big video game this year, that's something that I'm looking to develop as well. So really, and I also love technology. Technology inspires me. It's bridging the gap. One thing that's really important to me is when I'm writing and when I'm composing music, it's all about emotional storytelling, and it's all about making people feel something emotionally, making audiences respond to your music in a very emotional way. And film has an ability to do that. But I also enjoy using the latest technologies and bridging the gap between technology and emotions and how to achieve that. So I use I'm a pioneer. I like to think I'm a pioneer in using the latest technologies. I have a keyboard. I have this instrument called the Roly seaboard, and I was one of the first people in the country in the UK to have one. And it's like you play a keyboard, but it has these rubber, squidgy, soft keys on it. So, for example, when someone plays a violin, you can do vibrato on the violin, but you can't do that on a keyboard. But this particular instrument allows someone who plays a keyboard to get vibrato and emotional expression like vibrato for a keyboard player. And it's the first time we've ever had that. So I think there are lots of advancements in music technology that enable composers to sort of be expressive in ways that they've never been able to be before. Sorry, I'm getting very technical there, Anne.
No problem. I love that. Because it's always interesting for me and the listeners so how music works and so the process. And you mentioned that the work with the orchestra is one of the best thing about composing. Are there other things that makes it best or very funny?
Working with orchestras, working with musicians, or
And so what do you think is the best thing about composing? So
the best thing about composing, I think the best thing about composing for me is when I'm sharing the music with people and when an audience or when people hear your music for the first time, they respond to it, they feel something, and they hopefully feel what I'm feeling when I'm writing the music. It's the power of music is remarkable. When what I was feeling in my studio and excited about when I was writing the music for Untamed Romania, for example, it's just a joy when someone else listens to it and is as excited or feels the same emotions that you're feeling. It's communicating to people not through words but through sound and music. I think is absolutely joyous experience, and sharing that with people. Music for me is written, I write music to share it with people. And so something that I want to do is to produce my own music, not just for film and TV, but I'm planning in the early stages of writing an album of my own music as an artist. And that's something I'm very, very excited about and inspired by at the moment. So it's like passing through music that inspired me when I was younger, and on a daily basis I'm inspired by listening to other composers' music. And we live in a culture, a musical culture of we live in times where nothing is new anymore. We think nothing is new anymore. We've heard so many different styles of music because of technology and because of mass communication around the world. We all listen to everything all the time. And you think that there is nothing original or unique in the world of music. And then suddenly you'll hear something and you'll get really excited by it and think, wow, I've never heard that before. And there are composers out there creating music that I've never heard before, and sounds from around the world that I've never heard before. And that I find, is still fresh and different and exciting to be exposed to that, and how we all collaborate and our cultures sort of blend. And that's really exciting for me.
and is there something that makes composing less fun for you?
Yes. There are good sides and bad sides. There are advantages and disadvantages. Technology is great. It enables us all to be composers. But I think one of the sad things is that people think that, film clients, they think that you can just write music very quickly, and they don't give you enough time. Time schedules are very difficult, and of course budgets. It's not easy to work with very restrictive budgets. But good side of that is that even if you're working with a low budget, you can be creative and restrict your palette. So, for example, if I'm working on a score where I can only afford 2 musicians, what I'll do is I play everything myself. And it forces me to be creative in a different way, and that produces originality. But you can only do that if you have time. And so time is a very, very precious thing. You need more time to be creative. And sadly, people don't give us much time these days on film and television projects. I work on television series where I'm having to produce a lot of music, many, many minutes of music in a very short amount of time, sometimes 50 minutes of music in 1 week. And that's not always the best way to get creativity and fresh, different sounds out of people. So I think one of the problems there is that music for film and television can start to sound very samey. Everything starts to sound a bit bland, and I never blame the composer. I know what it's like in the industry. I never blame the composer. I think, well, there are lots of factors, and also politics, and there are lots of different sides to the industry. But time is one issue, and budgets. I wish that. But then I also work with people who value music, and I'm very lucky with projects like Untamed Romania, where I get creative freedom, or the video game which I scored, where I had 2 years to work on it, or so I try to work on projects that give me that freedom, and yeah.
Yeah, and about blaming the composer, I didn't that too, because I know the movies from today, especially the big blockbusters, are
Yes. Yeah.
The studio wants to be sure that it's a success, so it should look a little bit same and it sounds a little bit same. So yeah, it's very sad. So
it is a sad thing, but at the same time, creativity has a way of finding itself, true individuality, and expression with certain composers and musicians. That will always come through and rise to the top. Yeah, and so I think we live in very exciting times. I think. I mean, I give lots of talks, and I talk to students and young up and coming composers all the time, and I'm always excited about new talent and what's coming through, because it always has been like that historically, and it always will be like that. Despite the pressures and the tough times of our industry, it's always like that in the arts. So talent has a way of finding its way through, no matter what. And as long as the business people appreciate that and understand that, then we're in a good place. I think that with rights, our rights are bought out. Our publishing is bought out a lot, and it's making it harder for composers and musicians to survive. That's a sad thing that's happening to our industry, and we have to find a way of working together. I'm on the media committee at the Ivors Academy in the UK, and we work with EXA, the European Composers Organisation, and there are lots of conferences and talks that we go to, and we need to all work together with the publishers and with the broadcasters and the film and television industry to find ways of being able to create an industry that can sustain talent. It's so important. We need to nurture talent, and I travel a lot to give talks around the world. I'm going to Brazil next week to a conference about women in the music industry, and I'm talking at LA Comic Con in Los Angeles next week, and I'm going to other countries as well. I was in the Ukraine, and earlier this year in Kiev, giving masterclasses for a 3-day event with the British Council, and it was just so inspiring to hear talent and young composers from Ukraine and the surrounding countries, surrounding region, their dreams and aspirations, and being able to share my experience with them and guide them and advise them, and also learning from them about how their industry is growing. The Ukrainian film industry is growing, and so I think sharing of skills is really important as well.
And were you also in Cologne at the Soundcheck Cologne?
Not this year. I was last year. I sadly couldn't make it this year because I was too busy working up against deadlines, but I hope to make it next April because I went last year for the first time. Here in the UK, we don't really know about it very much, and it's such a fantastic place. You were asking me what I'm inspired about. I love meeting other composers, and I love Soundtrack Cologne was so inspiring. You know, that sharing of skills and knowledge and experience, and that because as working as a composer, media composer, you're very isolated. You're alone. You have to be happy being on your own a lot of the time. And so I'll take any opportunity to get out of the studio and travel and meet with other industry people. And Soundtrack Cologne is just the most amazing conference. I really, really loved it. I really want to be able to make it next year.
So it's called kind of a game. It's called 5 words, 5 answers, and yeah, I call 5 terms, and you tell me what comes to your mind. So 1 word, 1 sentence, something like that. So at first, film music,
storytelling,
world music,
transcends all barriers.
Builds bridges with music or something.
Bridges, yes, yeah, it brings all people together. That's what it means for me. Inclusive.
So, yeah, perhaps something easier.
Yeah.
Hollywood.
Global.
And UK.
UK. Part of Europe.
And the last one, hobbies.
Hobbies. Yoga, mindfulness. I love all the arts. I love all the. I go out to art galleries and writing music. Actually, writing music. Put down writing music is my composing. It's my hobby.
Wow. And so, yeah, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that.